I finished school at 18. Now, for those who don't live in the UK, basically we have high school from the ages of 11 to 16, and then between the ages of 16 to 18, we have a choice. So we can either go to what we call college for 2 years, which is not the same as university. It's basically just 2 years extra on top of high school, where you have a higher level of qualifications. It kind of sits somewhere in between a high school education and a university qualification. It's like somewhere in the middle. Um, we call them A levels in the United Kingdom. But you don't have to do A levels. You can also choose to do vocational qualifications. So maybe you want to get into like the catering industry, or you want to do like hairdressing, or maybe you want to become an electrician or a plumber, or whatever you want to do. You can also do those things. But in the last decade, I believe, it's now become the law that you have to do this extra qualification past 16. Because it used to be that once you finished school at 16, you could do whatever you wanted. But now you have to do an additional qualification. I think that's important. I think it's necessary. I think that, at the end of the day, you need something, like everyone has different career paths, different things that they want to do. Obviously, university is not for everyone, and not everyone wants to go to university. I know that when I was considering my options at 18, I didn't want to go to university. I had various reasons for that, and I'll get into that. But I did kind of feel at the time like there must be other options. And I grew up in London, and at the time, it kind of seemed like there weren't. I was very naive, and the job market back then was pretty much like, if you didn't have a degree, you were screwed. Like all that was available to you was just like, supermarket work and stuff, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with those jobs. I'm not shitting on them. I'm just saying that, if you want to have like a range of different possibilities, then I certainly think that university can open that up. But back then, there was just less opportunity. Now, you've got much, much more opportunity. You've got internships, apprenticeships, graduate schemes. I know obviously you need to, do a degree to do that, but there are like equivalent schemes where you don't need a degree to do it. So there's a lot more options now. And I sometimes wonder about this, if there were the level of opportunities that exist now back then, maybe I never would have gone to university. So I will say, before we get into my journey to university, that if you are thinking of going to university, or you're kind of at a crossroads and you're not really sure what to do, just do your research. Look into what's out there, look into what interests you, and look at the kind of the path to doing that, because going to university might not necessarily be on that path. You know what I mean? Like I feel that university is a big commitment. It's 3 years or sometimes more. So, you've really got to take some time to think about if you want to commit your time to that, and obviously the money towards doing that as well. Because there are other options, there are other alternatives. And I sincerely wish that I had access to those opportunities when I was 18, because I really didn't know what to do. There was no one around me kind of saying like, hey, have you considered this? Have you considered that? My mum was very she didn't push me at all, but she was kind of the mind that I should probably go to university. But when I said I wasn't interested, she was obviously fine with that. But I kind of felt like I needed a kick up the arse, from someone, and no one around me was really doing that. And it's not up to anyone to do that. It's no one's responsibility. But back then, if you can picture this kind of 18-year-old that was just clueless and had no idea what he wanted to do, that was me. These days, I'm much more driven. I know exactly what I want from life. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. Well, when I say I know what I'm doing, like I don't fully know what I'm doing, but I have a much better idea of what I should be doing, and I'm pursuing things that I love now. Whereas back then, I had no idea. I didn't know what I loved. I had a rough idea of things that I liked, but I didn't. For instance, I didn't really think about like how you could make a career in music, for instance, or how you could make money from that. You know what I mean? Like I had no idea. I had no idea that jobs like copywriting jobs existed. I had no idea of any of these things. And at school, I mean, my school, there just wasn't really good enough resources. I mean, if you wanted to go to university, they, you know, would go the whole hog and give you, they'd lay out a red carpet and be like, we got this and that and that and that and that. And, you know, I kind of felt excluded as soon as I said that I wasn't interested in going to university. It almost felt like they just dropped me like a lead weight and they're like, oh, you're not interested in going? Okay, well then screw you then. I'll never forget this, the way my school treated me, because my school was always really good to me, but this was like the one time that they were actually really shitty towards me, where they basically said to me, okay, if you're not interested in going to university, then you should go to this workshop group. And basically the workshop group, it was called the World of Work, and it's basically for anyone that was thinking of going straight into work. And you know, it was supposed to be a class where they would help you, you know, build a CV and all that stuff. And it wasn't even in a fucking classroom. It was in our sixth form common room where there happened to be some computers in a sort of semicircle square. And there was about 8 or 9 of us. And some of the people in there, you know, were like wasters. I don't want to be harsh. I'm not saying everyone there was, but you know, most people there, like, forget about university. They just didn't want to do anything with their lives, full stop. And I didn't want to be included with that crowd. You know, I was always ambitious, especially at that age. And I always have been. I've always wanted to achieve things with my life. But back then, I just had a lack of self-esteem, a lack of belief in myself. There was this big belief in myself that I wasn't intelligent enough to go to university, which is absolutely ludicrous. Anyone can go to university. Like, it doesn't matter what background you're from. Anyone can go. If you really want to go, it's possible to go. There will be universities available to you that will have the courses that are good for you. Okay, so don't ever believe that. If anyone ever tells you you're not good enough or you're not intelligent enough, or if you just believe that yourself, then that's nonsense. Stop believing that. I wish I'd had someone tell me that, because at that age, I just had no belief in myself whatsoever. I kind of thought, you know, I basically closed the road off to myself, which sounds really stupid. And I'm very surprised that I used to think that way, because I'm a totally different person these days. Like, when I look at opportunities that are presented to me, I kind of get excited about them and I'm like, oh, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Whereas back then, opportunities that were, you know, presented to me, I would immediately seek fault with them. I would say, oh, but, you know, what about this? What if this would happen? Oh, this barrier to entry, blah, 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 blah. Like, even the university process of applying and stuff, I sort of started it back then, but I didn't see it through because I could already see like problems with it. And it's that age old thing of, you know, you can be the type of person who finds problems in life, or you can be the type of person who finds solutions in life. You know, it's how you approach life. And back then, I was just really negative, unfortunately. I was not the person I am today. I'm not saying I'm some sort of perfect person now, because I'm not. We are all working progresses. But back then, yeah, I just had a very poor attitude and I was just not in a good place, and I really could have used some advice and it wasn't available to me. And I don't want this to sound like a sob story, because it's not, but I just wanted to paint a picture of why I didn't go to university at 18. I don't see it as a big deal. I mean, when I did eventually go to university, I discovered that there were people of all different ages that go to university and start at different ages. So it doesn't matter like what age you go. Yes, there will be a lot of 18-year-olds going to university straight out of school, but there's also a lot of people in their mid-20s, early 30s that want to do a career change. You'll find all sorts of different people. And no one cares about the age thing, or at least at my university, they didn't care. So yeah. But before we get into like the process of what happened when I started my university journey, I just want to say real quickly, I studied a management with marketing degree at Royal Holloway University. So that's where I went, and that's the degree I got. So I just want to say that, just throw that out there right now. Now, yeah, bringing it back to when I was 18. So obviously I started to get into work. I was working in a supermarket. It seemed like a okay job, you know, it paid a wage, it was fine. I worked for a supermarket called Waitrose, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about many times, so I won't go into loads of detail on that. Hated the job. Didn't hate all of it, but hated most of it. You know, the hours sucked. The commute was awful, back and forth. I was always tired. I was in a heavy metal band at the time. It was my first proper band, because I've been in many bands since then, and music's always been a big part of my life. But back then, it was like my first real, proper, serious project, and I really wanted it to work. And I was really serious about it. And I think probably the biggest reason that I was serious about it, other than wanting it to just work, was the fact that, you know, my day job was working in this supermarket, and I just felt depressed. I felt like I'd thrown my life away, or like I was a failure or something. And, you know, even in that place, like I worked my arse off, but I could never get to like the managerial level. There was all this bullshit politics that was stopping me from getting anywhere. So even there, like, you know, as ambitious as I was at that age, I couldn't even make grounds there. And, you know, I was in that band for 3 years. It started, I think, a year before I actually started that job. But about 2 years into the job, I'd had many kind of not proper breakdowns, but I was constantly having like little depressive spouts where I just hated it and I was complaining about it, but I wasn't doing anything about it because I was scared. I was scared that I was trapped in this job and there was no way of me getting out of it. And in many ways, university and the university career path was an escape route, but I just wasn't really sure if I could do it. And I was seeing someone at the time who had started her first year of university when I was sort of 2 years into this job. So I was seeing her start her university journey, obviously a bit later, but you know, she was still doing it. So I had this kind of envy of her, and I felt even more pressure and a sense of depression on myself because, you know, even my ex-partner was going to university. Seemingly everyone was going to university. I told a story actually in my Storytime series of the worst thing that someone ever said to me, which was one of my ex-girlfriend's friends who'd turned around to me and basically laughed in my face at the prospect of me, you know, working in this supermarket and, you know, her friend obviously going to university. So there were little things like that that were really reinforcing this sense of sort of pain in myself and disbelief in myself and depression in myself. I felt, you know, like I just couldn't do anything. I was never going to amount to anything. And I was a laughing stock to everyone around me. I also understood that the managers of this place that I was working at were laughing behind my back and saying like, oh yeah, he's just a write-off. He'll never achieve anything with his life. So you can see like how everyone was kind of shooting at me in all cylinders. And I don't want to make it sound like I was some really important person, because I wasn't. But sometimes people are like that. Sometimes, you know, people are out to get you or are laughing at you or are not acting in your best interests. And I had very few people around me that were actually speaking some truth. There were a few that I worked with, and you know who you are, that said some things that I needed to hear and did make me believe in myself. But I think that ultimately my decision to go back into education and go to university kind of started around the time that my band broke up. So my band broke up around December 2012. Like I said, so I was 2 years into this job. So I was entering that third year. I was still doing music. I was in another metal band for 2 or 3 months after that. And then I started doing some solo acoustic stuff as well. So I was always doing stuff. And I was always trying to kind of think about that. Like, as long as I keep busy, it doesn't matter what I do with my day job, because everyone has a day job. Everyone starts out with nothing and then eventually they quit their day job. It's where the whole, saying comes from, don't quit your day job. Well, some people do get to quit their day job and do what they love, and they have to go through 10 tons of shit to get to where they want to get to, but ultimately they get to where they want to get to. But I think the issue for me was when that second band ended, and I think because I was booted out of that band for some reason, I can't remember what it was. And then my solo acoustic shows were just not resonating. I didn't feel very good about them. And I was just at another crossroads. I was like, what am I doing? My music isn't working. I'm stuck in this supermarket that I hate. What am I doing with my life? It was one of those moments. And basically that's when I sort of started thinking about, getting back into education. But obviously I didn't know where to start. And I remember speaking to one of my ex-girlfriend's relatives who was a school teacher. He was retired, but he'd been a school teacher for most of his life. And he kind of heard about my situation and he suggested going to university. And obviously I had all the same doubts and concerns that I had, but he really pushed this idea of getting a specialism. You need a specialism. You need something that you can kind of focus on, something that you enjoy, and it will open up opportunities for you. And so I really thought about this. I looked into it and I discovered marketing, and I wasn't really familiar. Obviously I knew what marketing was because I studied business for many years at college and high school level, but I didn't really know, the ins and outs of it. I didn't know the career opportunities. I didn't know that you could study at university. I didn't know any of this stuff. I found this out later. So I did my research and I looked up some courses and I looked up the local university near me. And basically, I didn't have a proper plan. I just kind of called them up in that year during clearing. Now, for those who don't know what clearing is basically when you contact a university once all of the places have been kind of given out to people and stuff. It's kind of like a last resort, last minute thing. And it's mostly for people who didn't manage to get the grades that they wanted to get into a course. So they're sort of trying their luck with other universities or trying their luck with different courses. Sometimes they get in, sometimes they don't. It's kind of a lottery thing, because the way it works is, loads of people sign up for courses and stuff, but sometimes people drop out for various reasons, and that means that other places become free on courses. So it's kind of like a last resort, luck of the draw sort of thing. And I contacted Brunel University. That was the closest university to me. And I didn't, this is the thing, and this is my first mistake, so don't make this mistake. I didn't give it any thought. I didn't plan. I didn't think about where I was going to live. I kind of naively thought I'll just live at home and I'll go to the uni and that'll be it. I didn't even think about having a university life, you know what I mean? And being a young person. I was just so obsessed with just getting out of my supermarket job. So my bit of advice there would be, do your research, really think about where you want to go, because you've got many options. You can go abroad, you can study in a completely different city. You don't have to stay in your hometown. So that was my first mistake. But anyway, then I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe I'll get into this course through clearing. So I called them, and they basically told me incorrectly as well. This is very important to the story. They told me that I needed to do this access to higher education course at my local college in order to get into their course. Now, at the time, I took them for their word. They were a university. They were telling me that my grades weren't good enough. Now, my grades at A level were as follows: A star, A star, D. Okay, so that's 2 A stars in business, and then because I did like a BTEC course, but I got like full distinctions for everything, and then like a D in like psychology. And I think they were saying like, well, because you got the D in psychology, we can't admit you, which is bullshit. Because when I did eventually apply to Royal Holloway University, they admitted me based on my original results. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So anyway, I'm trying to get into clearing, and it's not happening. And they're telling me, yeah, you got to do this course. So I was like, okay, I'll do this course. And turns out that the course was a couple of £1,000. I can't remember the exact amount, but it wasn't cheap. And I'd never paid for a course before. Education had always been free from previously. Now I had to pay. So I was like, oh shit. And I can't remember how I got the money exactly. That bit's hazy, but I somehow got the money, and I applied for this course. I got in. It was a year-long course. I do highly recommend these, actually. If you do have issues with grades or difficulties getting into a university, then access to higher education courses can actually be very useful. And, I enjoyed the course. Even though I didn't need to do it, I really enjoyed the structure of it. It felt very similar to what I'd done at A-level. It was fun. I met new people. Most of it I already knew, but there was a bit of learning here and there, expanding on certain points and so on. But it was more of the same, really. But it was a good way to kind of bridge the gap, I suppose, and strengthen your university profile. Plus, they gave all of the help as far as applying for university and all the UCAS stuff, which obviously schools do as well, but not every school. Mine didn't do it very well, but at least this college did. So shout out to Uxbridge College. Anyway, I get about halfway through this course, and it comes to the time, because you have to start applying really early. It's really weird. Like I think I was applying in like January. And obviously you wouldn't start the course until like September. So this was like January of 2014. And I was in a bad spot. Me and my ex-girlfriend had just broken up. So I was depressed beyond belief. My head was all over the place. There was one bright side, one silver lining. I'd gone part-time at my job in order to accommodate my part-time, my college course, basically. I had to be part-time, and that was fantastic. I was so happy about that, because when I was full-time, I felt like I had no freedom in my job and no rights, and I was just stuck. But I swear to God, when I went part-time, I actually started enjoying my job. I got to choose my hours for the most part, and I got to work in other sections and work with different people and stuff, and there was more flexibility. So it wasn't that bad. I mean, obviously, when I eventually got to quit, I was so ready to leave. I was just like almost cheering. But yeah, that last year wasn't as bad. But anyway, so I wasn't in the greatest place, but things weren't all bad. But how it is when you get your first breakup. Like, I was devastated. It was difficult finding motivation, but somehow I was managing to. I think I was just trying to bury my head in my work and not really think about how depressed I was, which I'm not saying is the most sensible idea or even the most healthy option, but I don't know. That's how I deal with stuff when I'm really depressed. I focus on my work and I work harder, and it helps occupy my mind. But anyway, I obviously was calling universities and trying to get in. I believe I applied to, let me see, University of Greenwich, London Metropolitan University, which is ranked as one of the worst universities in the UK. But my reasoning behind applying for them was that, hey, if I apply to them, I'll get into a university. And to be honest, I will say, just on a side note, that like, even if a university has bad rankings, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad university. It really does depend. And we'll get into the reasons for why that is when we talk about rankings later. But I, at the time, I didn't really know much about this, so I just saw it as like, oh yeah, I'll put a bad university here, and then I stand a chance of like definitely at least getting in. But yeah, Royal Holloway was I think my first choice or my second choice, something like that. I really wanted to get in. I loved the university. I went on an open day and I fell in love with it. You know, it was perfect, and it did my course. It was quite highly ranked for marketing, but again, we'll get to the rankings thing. So anyway, I'm on the phone talking to this person, and I'm discussing my options in terms of the grades that I need to get in. And I tell her my predicted grades, and then I tell her my grades that I got for my A levels. And she sort of pauses, doesn't say much, and then says, "Well, based on these grades that you got at A level, we're happy to accept you right now." And I'm like, "What? What do you mean right now? Are you telling me that I don't need to be doing the course that I'm doing, that I don't have to finish it?" And she started to backpedal a little bit and was like, "Well, you know, I mean, you probably should finish your course, you know, just because, it's good for you and stuff, and it's good for your education." And I think she was trying to say, like, you should stick with things, especially if you're going to go to university and study for 3 years. You need to, practice sticking to things and seeing them through. She didn't come out and say that, but I think that's what she meant. But I was just dumbfounded by this, and it in a way it was really good because obviously I got accepted into the university I wanted. Suddenly things were starting to feel much better. I was starting to feel like I had some hope in my life, like maybe there was some kind of silver lining after all, and it wasn't all going to be doom and gloom. Now, when it came to kind of the end of the year, I entered again this depression. It was weird, I went on holiday. I used my final bonus from my job. I quit my job. I went to America for 2 weeks. It was incredible. I'd always wanted to go there, and it was just an incredible experience. I'll never forget it. But when I came back, I entered that bout of depression again. I started thinking about my ex-girlfriend and stuff. I got really lonely. I didn't have any friends at the time. It was a tough time mentally. And it was weird because, I was going to this new exciting place. I'd never been to university. I had no idea what to expect, but I'd heard all these great stories and exciting things about university. But I was just so depressed from my breakup. I was just in such a bad headspace that I couldn't even think about that. Then fast forward to the day of actually moving out, and wow. I mean, obviously my mum was really, sad about it, and I think it was now I understand it was because like this was really me leaving. Like, I didn't realize this at the time, but this was like me leaving and never coming back because, I moved out at 21 and I'm 27 now. And, I've returned home like very briefly here and there for like a week or two, just to stay, but I've never like stayed there. Because, I've lived with partners, like previous girlfriends I've lived with, I've lived abroad. I've basically been living by myself or living in shared places ever since, but principally I've been living for myself, living on my own essentially, or with a partner, but I've never really returned home. So this was like a sayonara, he's leaving the nest kind of situation. So now I understand the weight of it, but at the time I just thought she was being melodramatic. So sorry, Mum, I didn't realize the seriousness of it back then. But my stepdad was very like, he's a man now. Like he should go and be a man. Like, like he needs to leave. Like not in a pushy way, but like he was like, no, let him leave. Like this is good for him. And he was right. It was good for him. Me, I should say. But what's really funny is, in despite of being like feeling depressed, as soon as I arrived at that uni and I moved into those dormitory halls and I met the people I was going to be living with, and I just got all my stuff there and I saw the place, I just suddenly got really excited. and all my feelings of sadness just disappeared. I just got over it like really well. And obviously, like the next year, you know, I was still battling with it like a tiny bit, but it was right at the back of my mind because university had taken over my life. So I think if nothing else, a good lesson here is if you ever want to get over heartbreak or something, you know, depressive time in your life, then it's very good to consider starting something new, starting something like a big commitment that will take a lot of your time and effort and mindset, because it will keep you busy and it will give you like a new lease of life. And I think that's what I needed in my life, was a new lease of life, a new kind of opportunity, a chance to start something new, and a chance to get confidence, to gain confidence, because it sucks when you get broken up with. I mean, you lose a lot of confidence in yourself, you blame yourself. I know I did. And you know, I felt like I was a failure. You know, and it wasn't just the relationship thing. You know, I felt like I was a failure with that job. I was never able to become a manager, or, you know, after being there for like 3 years. So there are all these like failures in my life. But getting into university was a success. I was like, okay, this is the beginning of something new. I'm building successes now. I'm building steps towards a different kind of life. So that was essentially my journey to university.